The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest structure Commander Daniel Harris had ever seen. Giant crystal pillars rose toward a ceiling that showed the stars themselves. 17 platforms floated in a circle around the human delegation, and on each platform stood creatures from worlds that humans had only dreamed about. Daniel stood tall in his dress uniform. Beside him were Ambassador Catherine Cole and Chief Science Officer Benjamin Torres. They had trained for years for this moment. Earth had sent its best people to represent humanity before the galaxy. High Counselor Zethkari looked down at the humans from his elevated platform. He was an insect-like creature with wings that sparkled like diamonds. His voice came through the translation devices built into the walls, cold and formal. "Humans of Earth," he said, "we have watched your species for many years. We have studied your history. We have measured your worth. Today we will decide if you are fit to join the civilized species of this galaxy." Catherine stepped forward with a hopeful smile. "We are honored to be here. Humanity comes in peace. We want only to learn from you and to share what we know." A strange sound moved through the chamber. Daniel realized the aliens were laughing, though each species laughed differently. Some clicked, some whistled, and some made sounds humans could not hear. "Peace," repeated the Vorlathi representative. The Vorlathi were snake-like beings with 3 pairs of eyes. "Your species speaks of peace while your history books overflow with war." "Every intelligent species must have gone through difficult times," Benjamin argued. "Surely you understand that growth requires struggle." The Meridian delegate, a being made of pure light, pulsed brightly. "The Vorlathi achieved space travel without ever experiencing organized war. The Meridians evolved as a single mind, incapable of fighting ourselves. Your species is different. Human. You are predators who learn to use tools." Daniel felt his heart sink. They had expected some resistance, but this felt like an attack. High Counselor Zethkari raised one of his many arms for silence. "We have reached our decision. The Council has voted on the matter of human membership." The chamber went quiet. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. 16 species have voted against admission. 1 species has abstained. The High Counselor paused. "Humanity is denied membership in the Galactic Council." Catherine's face went pale, but she kept her voice steady. "We understand. Perhaps in time, when we have proven ourselves, you misunderstand," Zethkari interrupted. "This is not simply a denial of membership. The Council has determined that humanity poses a threat to galactic civilization." Daniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. "A threat. We have barely left our own solar system. It's precisely why we must act now," the Vorlathi representative hissed. "Your species breeds quickly. You adapt to any environment. You have a hunger for expansion that we have never seen in any other species. If we allow you to spread across the stars, you will eventually outnumber us all." The Meridian added, "Your genetic structure is dangerous. You can survive on worlds that would kill most species. You can eat almost anything. You are like a disease that adapts to every cure." Catherine tried again. "We can work together. We can prove that." Silence. Zethkari's voice echoed through the chamber. "The Council has made its decision. Humanity is hereby declared a quarantined species. You are forbidden from developing faster-than-light travel. You are banned from establishing colonies outside your solar system. You will remain confined to your small corner of space until you either evolve beyond your violent nature or destroy yourselves." Daniel could not stay quiet any longer. "You cannot cage an entire species. This is not justice. This is fear," Zethkari agreed, his compound eyes studying Daniel. "It is fear. We fear what you might become if we let you loose among the stars. Be grateful for our mercy, human. Many on this council argued for your complete destruction. This confinement is your species' chance to survive." The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. The Council had provided a ship to carry the human delegation home, but it moved slowly compared to the vessels the Council members used. It was a final insult, a reminder that humanity would never have access to the technology that made galactic civilization possible. Daniel spent most of the journey staring out the viewport at the stars. So many worlds out there. So many wonders to explore, and humanity would never see any of them. Catherine found him on the observation deck late one night. She looked tired, older than her years. The weight of their failures showed on her face. "What do we tell them?" she asked quietly. 8 billion people are waiting for news. They think we are coming home as members of a galactic community. Daniel turned to face her. "We tell them the truth. The truth will break their hearts." Maybe. Daniel looked back at the stars. Or maybe it will make them angry. Maybe that anger will drive them to do something incredible. Catherine shook her head. The Council controls all the technology for faster-than-light travel. They have thousands of ships. They have been ruling the galaxy for longer than humanity has existed. What can we possibly do against that? Benjamin Torres entered the observation deck, holding a tablet filled with data. He had spent the entire journey analyzing everything they had learned about Council technology. "The Council is old," he said. "Very old. And old things become set in their ways. They have been doing things the same way for thousands of years because they never had any reason to change." "So what?" Catherine asked. Benjamin smiled slightly. "So they have stopped innovating. They use the same technology their ancestors developed. They think the same thoughts their ancestors thought. They are powerful, but they are also predictable." Daniel felt something stir in his chest. It was a feeling he recognized from his years as a soldier. It was the feeling that came before a difficult mission, when failure seemed certain, but surrender was not an option. "You think we can find another way?" he said. "A different path to the stars that they have never considered." "I think we have to try," Benjamin replied. "What other choice do we have? Accept our cage and wait to die?" Catherine looked between the two men. She had spent her career believing in diplomacy, in the power of words and negotiation. But words had failed them. The Council had made their judgment, and no argument would change it. "When we get home," she said slowly, "we tell the world everything. The denial, the quarantine, the threat of destruction. We tell them what we face. And then," Daniel asked. Catherine's eyes hardened with determination. "And then we begin. Quietly. Secretly. We find scientists, engineers, and soldiers who refuse to accept this fate. We build something new. And someday, we show the galaxy exactly what humanity can do when we are told we cannot do something." The ship crossed into human space 2 days later. Earth hung in the viewport, beautiful and fragile. The people down there did not yet know that their dreams of joining the stars had been crushed. But as Daniel looked at his homeworld, he felt something unexpected. Not despair. Not anger. Hope. The Council had made a mistake. They had assumed that caging humanity would break the human spirit. They did not understand that humans had faced impossible odds before. They did not understand that telling a human they could not do something was often the best way to ensure they would find a way to do it. The war for humanity's future had begun, and the galaxy did not even know it yet. 100 years passed after the day humanity was banished from the stars. The Galactic Council placed watching stations at the edge of human space. They monitored every ship that launched, every signal that was sent. They watched humanity settle Mars and build stations around Jupiter. They saw humans mining asteroids and building cities on the moon. The Council believed they had contained the threat. They thought humans would eventually accept their place in the small corner of the galaxy they had been given. They were wrong. Admiral Lisa Monroe stood in a control room buried deep beneath the surface of Titan, one of Saturn's moons. She was 67 years old, with silver hair and eyes that had seen both triumph and tragedy. She was one of the last people alive who remembered the day of the banishment. Around her, hundreds of scientists and engineers worked at their stations. This facility did not officially exist. No records of its construction appeared in any government database. For 93 years, the best minds humanity had produced had worked here in complete secrecy. "The prototype is ready," said Dr. Nathan Cole. He was young, barely 30, but he carried the name of the woman who had tried to negotiate humanity's acceptance into the Council. Catherine Cole had been his great-grandmother. "We believe we have finally solved the problem." Lisa walked to a station and looked at the display. Numbers and equations filled the screen, calculations that represented nearly a century of work. "Explain it to me simply," she said. "I need to understand before I authorize the test." Nathan nodded. "The Council controls faster-than-light travel because they control access to exotic matter. There are only a few places in the galaxy where this matter exists naturally, and they guard those places carefully. Without exotic matter, their method of FTL travel is impossible. So we found a different method." "Exactly." Nathan pulled up a new display, showing a small ship in a testing chamber. "We do not need exotic matter. We developed a way to fold space itself using focused gravitational waves. It is complete. Eely different from anything the Council uses." Lisa felt her heart beat faster. "How fast?" "About 300 times faster than Council ships." The room had gone quiet. Everyone was listening. They all understood what this moment meant. "And the Council satellites?" Lisa asked. "Will they detect the test?" "No. Our method leaves no signature they know how to look for. They will see nothing." Lisa took a deep breath. She thought about Catherine Cole, who had died still believing that humanity would one day prove itself to the galaxy. She thought about all the people who had worked in secret for generations, sacrificing normal lives to pursue this dream. "Begin the test," she ordered. The prototype ship vanished from the chamber. For 37 seconds, nothing happened. The scientists watched their instruments with fear and hope mixed together on their faces. Then the ship reappeared. "Location confirmed," an engineer reported, his voice shaking. "The ship traveled to Alpha Centauri and back. Total time, 3 hours and 42 minutes. The room erupted in cheers. People hugged each other and cried. Some fell to their knees. 93 years of work had finally paid off. Lisa Monroe allowed herself to smile. Then she raised her hand for silence. "This is only the beginning," she said. "We have proven that we can travel faster than the Council. Now we must decide what to do with this power." Over the following decades, humanity moved through the galaxy like ghosts. They established colonies on worlds the Council had never bothered to explore. Planets that were too cold, too hot, too far from trade routes. Places that comfortable species would never want to visit. Director Samuel Grant led the expansion from a ship that never stayed in one place for more than a few days. He was Lisa Monroe's chosen successor, a man who had spent his entire life preparing for this role. The colonies grew quickly. Humans adapted to every environment they encountered. They built cities in frozen wastelands and settlements in scorching deserts. They found ways to survive where no other species could. But Samuel knew that hiding in the shadows forever was not an option. "We need allies," he told his council of advisors during a meeting on a world they had named New Hope. "Humanity alone cannot challenge the Council. We need to build something bigger." Commander Patricia Wells, who oversaw the colonies in the outer regions, spoke up. "There are species on the edges of Council space who have been mistreated. Smaller civilizations that the Council ignores or exploits. They might be willing to work with us." "Dangerous," said another advisor. "If word reaches the Council that we are recruiting allies, they will come for us with their full military strength." Samuel considered this carefully. He knew the risks, but he also knew that humanity could not achieve its goals through military power alone. They needed friends. "We will be careful," he decided. "We will approach these species quietly. We will offer them technology, protection, and something the Council never gave them: respect." The first species to join humanity was the Kethmari, the avian race that had abstained from the vote against humanity. They had been pushed to the edges of Council politics for their refusal to condemn humans. When Samuel offered them full partnership, they accepted immediately. Others followed. The Telrani, a peaceful species that the Vorlithi had conquered and enslaved. The Dramaki, who had been denied advanced technology by the Council for centuries. The Ves, whose homeworld had been stripped of resources by Meridian corporations, one by one. Species that had been forgotten or abused by the Council found a new home with humanity. Christina Park, a young diplomat who had helped negotiate many of these alliances, proposed the name for what they were building: the council rules through fear, she told Samuel during a planning session. Species join them because they have no other choice. We are building something different. We are building a dominion based on choice. Every species that joins us does so because they want to. That is our strength. Samuel liked the name, the Terran Dominion. It sounded powerful, but it also promised something the galaxy had never seen before, a partnership of equals. By the year 3050, the Dominion included 37 species. They controlled territory across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their technology was superior to anything the Council possessed, and still, the Council did not know they existed. Samuel was an old man now, preparing to pass leadership to the next generation. He called his successor, Margaret Hayes, to his chambers for a final conversation. I will not live to see the day we reveal ourselves, he said, but you will. When that day comes, remember why we built this. Not for revenge. Not for conquest. We built this to prove that another way is possible. Margaret nodded solemnly. I understand. The Council will offer you war when they learn the truth. Some of our own people will want to accept that offer. They will want to destroy those who tried to cage us. Samuel gripped her hand with surprising strength. Do not let them. We must be better than our enemies. Otherwise, everything we have built means nothing. Margaret carried those words with her as she took command of the Dominion. She knew that the day of revelation was coming soon. The galaxy would learn that humanity had not accepted its cage, and when that day came, everything would change. The Terran Dominion waited in the shadows. Growing stronger with each passing year, the Council continued their lives. Unaware that the species they had dismissed as dangerous animals had become the architects of a new galactic order. Humanity's quiet century was almost over. The next chapter would be written in fire and starlight. Chancellor Margaret Hayes stood before the window of her office on New Terra, watching ships from a dozen different species move through the orbital traffic above. The Terran Dominion had grown beyond anything its founders had imagined. 47 species now called themselves members. Hundreds of worlds flew the silver and blue flag of the Alliance and the Galactic. The Council still did not know. Admiral Christopher Blake, her intelligence chief, entered with a troubled expression. He had spent 30 years gathering information from Council space, building networks of spies and informants. His reports were always accurate, which made today's news even more concerning. They are getting suspicious, he said without greeting. Economic analysts in Council space have noticed strange patterns. Trade routes that used to bring wealth to Council members are drying up. Species that used to depend on Council technology are finding it elsewhere. Margaret turned from the window. How long until they trace it back to us? 3 to 5 years, perhaps less. They are looking for familiar signatures and finding nothing. But they are not stupid. Eventually, they will send scouts to investigate the regions where their influence is fading. Margaret had known this day would come. The Dominion had grown too large to remain hidden forever. Every new member species increased the risk of discovery. Every trade agreement left traces that careful observers might follow. Then we prepare for revelation, she said. Alert all fleet commanders. Begin moving defensive assets to strategic positions. And contact Ambassador Kirathel. I want to know if the Kethmari are ready to make their choice public. The next 3 years were filled with preparation. The Dominion established emergency supply routes and reinforced critical systems. Fleets took up positions that would allow them to respond quickly to any Council attack. Diplomats reached out to species within Council space who might be sympathetic to the Dominion's cause. Margaret spent long nights reviewing intelligence reports and military assessments. The Council commanded a fleet of over 50,000 ships. The Dominion had 12,000. In a straight fight with equal technology, the numbers would be overwhelming. But the Dominion did not have equal technology. They had better technology. Our ships are faster, more maneuverable, and more heavily armed. General Rachel Torres explained during a strategy meeting. She was the Dominion's top military commander, a descendant of Benjamin Torres, who had stood before the Council 2.5 centuries ago. Ship for ship, we outmatch them in every category. But they have 4 times our numbers, another officer pointed out. Which is why we will not fight them ship for ship, Rachel replied. We will use our speed to choose when and where battles happen. We will strike where they are weak and withdraw before they can concentrate their forces. We will make them afraid to spread their fleet too thin. Margaret listened to the debate but said nothing. She knew that war was possible, perhaps even likely, but she also believed there might be another path. What about the moderate species in the council? She asked. Not everyone supported our banishment. Not everyone wants war. Rachel shook her head. The hardliners control the council now. The Vorolthian Meridians have spent 2 centuries consolidating power. Any species that speaks against them is punished. Then perhaps our revelation will give those moderate voices a reason to speak up. The revelation came sooner than anyone expected. A council survey ship, investigating unusual energy readings in what they believed to be unexplored space, stumbled upon a Dominion patrol. The patrol commander had standing orders for exactly this situation. He disabled the survey ship's communications and engines, and escorted it to the nearest Dominion base. Within hours, the council knew that something had gone wrong. Within days, they had pieced together enough information to understand the scale of what they faced. High Counselor Zethkari III, grandson of the being who had condemned humanity, called an emergency session. The 17 remaining council species gathered in the Great Hall in Vethra-Prime. It's the same chamber where humanity had been banished. Margaret Hayes traveled to that chamber herself. She would not send subordinates to deliver this message. The council delegates stared in shock as the human Chancellor walked into the hall. Behind her came representatives from 47 species, all wearing the colors of the Terran Dominion. And beside her walked Ambassador Kirathel, ready to announce that the Kethmire were leaving the council forever. This is impossible, the Vorlothi representative hissed. Humans were confined to their solar system. They have no faster-than-light technology, Margaret smiled. You confined us based on your understanding of what was possible. You assumed that because you could not imagine another path, no other path existed. That was your mistake. She stepped forward, her voice carrying through the chamber. 250 years ago, you told humanity that we were too violent, too dangerous, too primitive to join your civilization. You locked us in a cage and expected us to accept our fate. The council delegates shifted nervously. Some looked angry. Others looked afraid. Instead, we built something new. Not through conquest, but through cooperation. Every species standing behind me chose to join the Dominion. They came to us because we offered them what you never would: equality, respect, and genuine partnership. High Counselor Zethkari found his voice. You have violated galactic law. You have corrupted species that belong to the Council. This is an act of war. No, Margaret replied calmly. This is an act of liberation. The species you call your property call themselves free citizens. They came to us because they were tired of being exploited and ignored. Kirathel stepped forward to speak. The Kethmari abstained from the vote against humanity because we saw potential that others missed. Now we have seen that potential realized. We formally withdraw from the Galactic Council and pledge our loyalty to the Terran Dominion. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted at each other. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for negotiation. The Meridians, always calculating, began quietly assessing the new balance of power. Margaret raised her hand and waited for silence. It took several minutes, but eventually the chamber quieted. The Dominion does not want war, she said. We want change. Every species currently living under Council rule has a choice. You can remain under the control of those who see you as subjects, or you can join an alliance that will treat you as equals. The decision is yours. She turned and walked out of the chamber, her delegation following. Behind her, the Council continued to argue. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. Within a month, 3 more species had requested admission to the Dominion. The news spread across the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. For the first time in history, there was a genuine alternative to Council rule. Margaret returned to New Terra, knowing that the next phase would be the most dangerous. The Council would not accept this challenge to their power. War was coming, but as she looked at the representatives of 47 species working together in the Dominion capital, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt hope. Humanity had built something remarkable. Now they would have to fight to protect it. The Shadow Empire had stepped into the light, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Council's response came 6 months after the revelation. 30,000 warships gathered at the border of Dominion space, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. 12 species had contributed ships to this armada, each one determined to crush the upstart humans and their alliance of traitors. Admiral Darius watched the enemy formation from the bridge of his flagship, the carrier New Horizon. He was 52 years old, a career officer who had spent his entire life preparing for exactly this moment. His fleet numbered only 4,000 ships. On paper, the battle should have been a slaughter. Victor had no intention of fighting on paper. Enemy formation confirmed, his tactical officer reported. They are approaching in standard Council assault pattern. 3 waves. Heavy ships in the center, lighter vessels on the flanks. Victor studied the holographic display. The Council had been using the same battle tactics for over 1,000 years. Why would they change what had always worked? Signal all ships, Victor ordered. Execute dispersal pattern Theta 7. The Dominion fleet scattered. Individual ships and small squadrons vanished into fold space, the faster-than-light method that humans had developed. They reappeared moments later throughout the enemy formation, emerging behind defensive lines and between capital ships. The Council commanders had never seen anything like it. Their communications filled with confused orders and panicked reports. Ships that had been expecting a straightforward engagement found themselves surrounded by enemies that appeared and disappeared at will. Victor watched the battle unfold from a position 3 light seconds away from the main engagement. His ship jumped to a new location every few minutes, staying ahead of any attempt to track him. Focus fire on their command ships, he ordered. Take out their coordination and let confusion do the rest. The strategy worked better than Victor had hoped. Council ships fired at targets that vanished before their weapons arrived. They hit their own allies as often as they hit enemies. The massive numerical advantage that should have guaranteed victory became a liability, as so many ships in such a small space created chaos that the Dominion exploited ruthlessly. The battle lasted for hours. When it ended, 18,000 Council ships had been destroyed or disabled. The Dominion had lost 600. Victor felt no joy as he reviewed the casualty reports. 600 ships meant thousands of dead crew members. War always had a cost, even in victory. Send a message to Chancellor Hayes, he told his communications officer. The first battle is won, but this is only the beginning. Margaret Hayes received the report with mixed feelings. The victory proved that the Dominion could fight the Council and win. But it also meant that the Council would never negotiate from a position of strength. They would keep fighting, keep building new ships, keep throwing forces at the Dominion until one side or the other was destroyed. We cannot win a war of attrition, General Rachel Torres warned during an emergency strategy session. They have more resources, more shipyards, more population. Every ship we lose hurts us more than every ship they lose hurts them. Then we do not fight a war of attrition, Margaret replied. We change the nature of the conflict. The strategy that emerged was bold almost to the point of madness. Instead of defending their territory and waiting for the next Council attack, the Dominion would strike at the heart of Council power, not to conquer, but to demonstrate that the old order could no longer protect its members. Task forces launched simultaneous raids across Council space. They destroyed supply depots and communication relays. They disabled orbital defense platforms and military shipyards. They avoided civilian targets completely. Focusing only on the infrastructure that supported the Council's war effort, General Rachel de Torres led the most important mission herself. Her target was Vethra Prime, the neutral world where humanity had been condemned 2.5 centuries ago. Her fleet arrived in the system without warning. Council defenders scrambled to respond, but they were too slow. Dominion ships swept through the orbital defenses like wind through leaves, disabling weapons platforms and communication arrays with surgical precision for 6 hours. The Dominion controlled the space above the Council's capital. They could have bombarded the surface, destroyed the Great Hall, killed the leaders of 17 species. The Council defenders watched helplessly, waiting for the destruction to begin. It never came. Instead, Rachel broadcast a message to every world in Council space. "We came here to show you what we could do," she said, her face appearing on screens across the galaxy, "and to show you what we chose not to do. The Terran Dominion does not want to rule the galaxy. We want to change it. Every species currently under Council authority has a choice. You can remain under the control of those who have failed to protect you, or you can join an alliance that will treat you as partners. The decision is yours." The withdrawal from Vethra Prime was as clean as the assault. Not a single civilian was harmed. Not a single building was damaged. The message was clear. Humanity had the power to destroy the Council. But they wanted something greater than destruction. The psychological impact was enormous. If the Dominion could strike the Council's capital at will, nowhere was safe. Species that had considered resistance impossible suddenly saw a path forward, but the Council hardliners refused to accept defeat. The Vorlathi and Meridians pushed for total war. They began conscripting soldiers from client species and converting civilian factories to military production. They were preparing for a conflict that would consume the entire galaxy. Margaret faced a terrible choice. The Dominion could win a long war, but the cost would be measured in billions of lives. Entire worlds would burn. The dream of building something better would be drowned in blood. "There has to be another way," she said during a late-night meeting with her closest advisors. "We did not come this far to become the monsters they said we were." Ambassador Kira Theloff. Read a different approach. The Council's strength depends on unity. Not all species truly support the hardliners. If we can separate the moderates from the extremists, we might end this war without destroying the galaxy. The diplomatic offensive that followed was as intense as any military campaign. Dominion representatives reached out to species within Council space who had doubts about the war. They offered peace treaties and trade agreements. They promised that species who abandoned the Athos Council would be welcomed into the Dominion with full rights and privileges. They also shared evidence of Council crimes. The Vorlathi atrocities against conquered species. The Meridian economic exploitation. The centuries of oppression that the Council had hidden behind a mask of civilized governance, one by one. The Council's coalition crumbled. Small species withdrew first, no longer willing to sacrifice their children for a cause they did not believe in. Then the mid-level powers began secret negotiations with the Dominion. Finally, even some of the original species who had voted against humanity started questioning whether the war was worth fighting. The end came not with a great battle, out with a vote. In the same chamber where humanity had been condemned, the Galactic Council voted to dissolve itself. 11 of the remaining 16 members chose to seek membership in the Terran Dominion. The Vorlathi and Meridians, along with 3 allied species, refused to accept the new order. They withdrew to their core territories. Bitter and defeated, Margaret Hayes stood in the Great Hall of Vethra Prime, looking at the place where humanity's banishment had been pronounced. She thought about all the generations who had worked and sacrificed to reach this moment. "We won," Rachel Torres said quietly beside her. Margaret nodded slowly. "We survived. We proved them wrong. But winning was never the real goal. Then what was?" Margaret turned to face her general. "Building something worth winning. That work is just beginning." The War of Reckoning was over, but the true test of the Terran Dominion was still to come. They had proven they could fight. Now they had to prove they could lead. 300 years had passed since the day humanity was banished from the stars. The galaxy had changed beyond recognition. And at the center of that change stood the Terran Dominion. Chancellor. Daniel Cole looked out from the observation deck of Unity Station, the massive orbital complex that served as the Dominion's capital. Below him, the planet New Terra rotated slowly, its surface covered with cities and forests and oceans that humans had created from nothing. Above, Ships from over 200 different species moved through carefully organized traffic patterns. 200 species? Daniel still found it hard to believe sometimes. What had started as a desperate alliance of the rejected and forgotten had become the largest political union in galactic history. The Vorlothi delegation has arrived, his aide announced. They are ready to begin the membership discussions. Daniel raised an eyebrow. The Vorlothi had been humanity's most bitter enemies. They had voted for human destruction. They had led the war against the Dominion. And now, 50 years after their defeat, they were asking to join the very alliance they had tried to destroy. Their new generation does not share their parents' hatred, the aide explained. They have watched the Dominion grow and prosper. They want to be part of what we are building. Daniel nodded slowly. This was what the founders had dreamed of. Not revenge against those who had wronged humanity, but a galaxy where even former enemies could become partners. He made his way to the council chamber, where representatives from across the Dominion had gathered for the annual assembly. The room was a testament to the diversity that humanity had embraced. Crystalline beings sat beside creatures of living fire. Beings that breathed methane, shared space with species that existed partly in other dimensions. Daniel took his place at the speaker's platform and looked out at the sea of alien faces. Each one represented a civilization that had chosen to join humanity's vision of the future. 300 years ago, he began, my ancestors stood in a chamber much like this one. They were told that humanity was too violent, too aggressive, too dangerous to join galactic civilization. They were told that humans would never amount to anything beyond the violent predators we had always been. The chamber was silent. Every delegate knew this history. It was taught in schools across the Dominion as a reminder of how far they had come. Those who condemned us were not entirely wrong about our nature, Daniel continued. We were violent. Our history was filled with war and cruelty. But what they failed to understand was that the same qualities that made us dangerous also made us determined. When we were told we could not do something, we found a way to do it anyway. When we were pushed down, we got back up. When we were excluded, we built our own door and invited everyone who wanted to enter. He gestured toward the assembled delegates. Look at what we have created together. Not a human empire, but a coalition of equals. Not a dominion of conquest, but a dominion of choice. Every species in this chamber chose to be here. Every world in our alliance joined because they wanted to, not because they were forced. The applause that followed came from beings of every shape and size, united in appreciation for what they had built together. Later that evening, Daniel met with Ambassador Kirithel IV, great-granddaughter of the Kethmari who had first allied with humanity. They walked together through the gardens of Unity Station, surrounded by plants from 100 different worlds. Your ancestors took a great risk, Daniel said. When they abstained from the vote against humanity, they had no reason to believe we would become anything more than a bitter, caged species. Kirithel spread her wings in a gesture of acknowledgement. My ancestors saw something in humanity that others missed. Not just your violence or your ambition, but your ability to change. You are the only species we have ever encountered that truly transforms itself within a single generation. What you were yesterday is not what you must be tomorrow. And now, here we are, Daniel said, building something our ancestors could barely have imagined. The universe is vast, Kirithel observed. There are regions we have not explored, species we have not met, challenges we cannot yet imagine. I know. Daniel looked up at the stars visible through the transparent dome above them. But whatever comes, we will face it together. That is what the Dominion truly means. Not humans leading other species, but all of us moving forward as one. The years that followed brought new challenges and new triumphs. The Dominion expanded into regions of the galaxy that had never been explored. They made contact with species that had evolved in complete isolation and welcomed them into the Alliance. They faced crises that threatened to tear the coalition apart and found ways to hold it together. Through it all, principles established by the founders held firm. Every member species maintained control over their own affairs. Decisions that affected the whole Dominion were made by consensus, not by command. When conflicts arose between members, They were resolved through negotiation and compromise, not through force. It was not a perfect system. Nothing involving so many different species with different needs and values could ever be perfect. But it worked. For the first time in galactic history, beings who had nothing in common, except a desire for something better, had found a way to live and work together. The Voralithi eventually did join the Dominion, their application approved after years of negotiation and reconciliation. So did the Meridians and the other species that had stood against humanity during the war. Old hatreds faded as new generations grew up knowing only cooperation and partnership. On the anniversary of humanity's banishment, a ceremony was held each year in the Great Hall on Vethra Prime. The chamber where humanity had been condemned is now a museum, preserved exactly as it had been 3 centuries ago. Representatives from across the Dominion gathered there to remember the past and celebrate how far they had come. Daniel Cole stood at the center of the chamber during one such ceremony, looking up at the platforms where alien judges had once pronounced humanity unworthy of the stars. "We were told we were monsters," he said quietly. "Dangerous animals who could never be trusted among civilized beings. And perhaps, at that moment in our history, they were right to fear us." He turned to face the assembled delegates, beings from species that had once hated and feared humanity. But they made a mistake. They assumed that what we were was all we could ever be. They did not understand that humans have always been defined not by where we start, but by where we choose to go. They gave us a cage, and we turned it into a ladder. They gave us darkness, and we built our own light. He spread his arms to encompass the diverse gathering around him. This is humanity's answer to those who doubted us. Not an empire built on conquest, but an alliance built on trust. Not a dominion of fear, but a dominion of hope. We proved that we could change. We proved that we could grow. And we proved that when we reach out our hands in friendship, there are others in this vast universe who will reach back. The ceremony concluded with a simple ritual. A human, a Kethmari, and a Voralathi stood together and lit a single flame, symbolizing the unity that had been forged from centuries of conflict and cooperation. As Daniel watched the flame burn, he thought about the humans who had stood in this very chamber 300 years,